In the vast and silent steppes of Central Asia, beneath endless skies and windswept plains, a child was born who would change the destiny of continents. His name was Temujin. The world would later know him as Genghis Khan. He did not inherit a kingdom. He did not rise from royal blood. He was born into hardship, to a tribe torn apart by violence, to a life shaped by hunger, survival, and relentless struggle. And yet, from these humble and brutal beginnings emerged one of the most formidable conquerors in human history. Under Genghis Khan, scattered tribes became a united army, and that army became an empire so vast that it reshaped the map of the world. This is not just the story of a man. This is the story of how a leader forged the largest contiguous empire humanity has ever seen, and how his legacy still echoes in our modern world, in borders, in trade, in culture, and even in our DNA. This is the story of Genghis Khan and his impact on world history. He was not born into comfort. He was born into fragility. Temujin entered the world around 1162 in the harsh Mongolian steppe, where winter winds could kill and only the strong survived. At the age of 9, his father was poisoned by a rival tribe. Overnight, Temujin and his family lost protection, lost status, and were abandoned by their own clan. They were left to starve. But hardship did not break him. Hardship forged him. He learned to hunt for survival, to track footsteps in snow, to value loyalty above blood, and to never forget betrayal. Throughout his early years, Temujin developed what would later define his leadership, a belief that loyalty is earned, not inherited. He would elevate allies not by ancestry, but by ability. This principle, revolutionary for its time, began sowing the seeds of an empire. The Mongolian steppe was not a nation. It was a fragmented battlefield of tribes, alliances, betrayals, and endless revenge cycles. Temujin challenged that. He dismantled aristocratic privilege. He broke down tribal barriers. He created a new social structure, one built around merit and loyalty. Warriors were no longer just from this family or that clan. They became part of a unified Mongol identity. And when the Great Assembly, the Kurultai, elected him as Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler, it marked the birth not just of an empire, but of a new world order. Under his command, Mongols stopped fighting each other and began conquering the world together. Genghis Khan did not just build an army. He built a precision instrument of conquest, an evolving mechanism of speed, fear, intelligence, and adaptability. His soldiers were not lumbering infantry. They were living arrows, mounted on fast horses, trained to unleash death at full gallop. The power of the horse. Each Mongol warrior typically had 3 to 5 horses, rotating between them to maintain stamina. They could travel over 100 to 120 kilometers per day, extraordinary mobility that stunned their enemies. While European knights moved slowly under heavy armor, Mongol horsemen struck like lightning, fast, silent, and sudden. The composite bow, a weapon of terror. Their legendary composite bow was made of horn, wood, and sinew, its curvature perfected for both range and killing power. It could pierce armor at distances European archers couldn't dream of. Mongol warriors could fire with accuracy at full speed, and even backwards, twisting their torso in mid-gallop,
a technique unmatched by any other army of the time. The feigned withdrawal, genius battlefield trick. One of their devastating tactics was the fake withdrawal. The Mongols would pretend defeat, break formation, and flee. The enemy, thinking victory was at hand, rushed forward, and then the Mongols would turn back in perfect synchronization, encircling their opponents and annihilating them. It was not brute strength, it was psychological chess. Intelligence and communication. Genghis Khan built a communication relay system, the Yam, with horse stations every 25 to 30 miles. Messages moved across the empire faster than any kingdom in Europe could manage. This allowed Genghis Khan to coordinate armies across unimaginable distances, a level of strategic oversight centuries ahead of his time. Discipline and loyalty. Mongol soldiers faced strict rules. No looting without permission, no disobedience in formation, no acting independently of orders. Yet they were rewarded by merit, not birth. A commoner could rise above nobility through skill and loyalty. This created a professional, unified war machine, not just a tribal militia. The psychology of fear. Genghis Khan used terror not as cruelty, but as a weapon. Cities that surrendered peacefully were often spared. Cities that resisted became warnings carved into the memory of civilizations. This spread across Asia and Europe. Do not resist the Mongols. And many obeyed without a fight.
Within just one generation, the Mongol Empire expanded at an almost impossible speed. This was not simple conquest. This was geopolitical re-engineering, a rewriting of the balance of power. The conquest of the Jin dynasty. The Mongols began by dismantling the Jin dynasty in northern China, one of the most advanced civilizations on Earth. They overcame walled cities, fortified outposts, and massive armies. Here, they learned the art of siege warfare, employing Chinese engineers to build catapults, trebuchets, and even primitive rockets. Genghis Khan absorbed technology into his empire like a sponge. Every enemy became a teacher. The fall of Khwarezm, a turning point. When the ruler of the Khwarezm Empire killed Mongol traders and diplomats, he committed a fatal mistake. Genghis Khan responded with overwhelming fury, not out of vengeance alone, but to enforce a principle. Those who violate diplomacy shall bear the consequences. City after city fell. Samarkand, Bukhara, Urgench. At Bukhara, Genghis Khan reportedly told the survivors, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me." Whether truly spoken or merely legend, the message was clear. Opposing the Mongols was opposing fate itself. The expansion into Russia. The Mongols rode into the Rus lands, defeating armies many times their size. They left princes dead on frozen rivers, burned fortresses to ash, and demonstrated that no land was too cold or distant to conquer. The edge of Europe. Mongol forces reached the doorstep of Central Europe, Poland, Hungary, even the gates of Vienna. Only Genghis Khan's death stopped the advance, for all Mongol princes were required to return for the imperial assembly. Europe was spared not by strength, but by timing. A single sky over many nations. At its height, the Mongol Empire stretched from Korea to Hungary, Siberia to the Persian Gulf, the Arctic to the Himalayas. It became the largest contiguous empire in history, a land unified by trade, diplomacy, and communication on a scale the world had never seen.
Genghis Khan was not only a conqueror, he was an architect of systems,
systems that reshaped how civilizations interacted, traded, governed, and even thought about power. While his armies rode with thunder, his policies transformed the fabric of Eurasian society for centuries. A new administrative order. When Genghis Khan united the tribes, he also created a new model of governance, one that valued ability over ancestry. He implemented a hierarchy built on merit, discipline, and accountability, appointing generals and governors not because of bloodline, but because of talent. For a medieval world dominated by nobility and inherited privilege, this was revolutionary. He divided the empire into administrative units and placed skilled officials, sometimes Mongol, sometimes Chinese, Persian, or Uyghur, in charge. The empire functioned like a multi-ethnic administrative machine, coordinated across thousands of miles. Genghis Khan understood something crucial. Conquest wins territory. Administration keeps it. The Yasa, the Great Law. Genghis Khan introduced a legal code known as the Yasa. Though its full text is lost, its principles survived in records. Absolute loyalty to the Khan, protection of ambassadors and diplomats, severe punishment for theft and corruption, religious freedom, military discipline, fair distribution of war spoils, and heavy penalties for harming civilians without cause. The Yasa created a sense of order that allowed the empire to function despite its massive size and cultural diversity. Where other rulers imposed their religion or language, Genghis Khan imposed rules that made the empire predictable, stable, and economically powerful. Freedom of religion. Perhaps one of the most modern elements of Mongol rule was religious tolerance. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Taoists, and shamans lived under the same rule with equal respect. Priests, monks, and scholars from different faiths were often granted tax exemptions. Genghis Khan's view was simple. I do not care what god you worship. I care how loyal you are. In a world where kingdoms slaughtered each other over faith, this policy enabled commerce, diplomacy, and cultural exchange on an unprecedented scale. The Silk Road Renaissance. Before the Mongols, the Silk Road was dangerous. Robbers, corrupt officials, and constant warfare made long-distance trade unpredictable. Under the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, the Silk Road entered its golden age. Caravans traveled from China to Europe with guaranteed safety. Merchants of every background were protected by Mongol patrols and permitted to operate freely. The Yam relay system, with its chain of horse stations, created the fastest communication network in the world. For the first time, the continent functioned like a connected economic organism. Goods, ideas, technologies, and even diseases traveled across borders that once had been isolated by conflict. Gunpowder, printing techniques, medical knowledge, paper currency, astronomy, and mathematics moved across borders that once had been isolated by conflict. The Mongol Empire transformed Eurasia into a commercial superhighway long before modern globalization. Cultural exchange and knowledge transfer. The empire became a bridge linking worlds. Chinese engineering influenced the Middle East. Persian astronomy reached China. European travelers like Marco Polo entered a world larger than their imagination. Medical texts were translated across languages. Artistic styles blended and evolved. The Mongols did not create all this knowledge, but they built the roads, safety, and political coherence that allowed it to flourish. In many ways, they were the circulatory system of medieval civilization. The DNA of an empire. Modern genetic studies reveal that a significant percentage of men in Central Asia carry a Y chromosome lineage tracing back to a single male who lived approximately 800 years ago. While debated, many scholars believe this lineage points to the descendants of Genghis Khan or his immediate male relatives, a sign of the political marriages, offspring, and influence that spread across the empire. His legacy is not only historical or cultural, it is biological. The empire of Genghis Khan was not simply a force of destruction. It was a network, a structure, a reordering of Eurasian civilization.
Genghis Khan was not only a conqueror, he was an architect of systems, systems that reshaped how civilizations interacted, traded, governed, and even thought about power. While his armies rode with thunder, his policies transformed the fabric of Eurasian society for centuries. A new administrative order. When Genghis Khan united the tribes, he also created a new model of governance, one that valued ability over ancestry. He implemented a hierarchy built on merit, discipline, and accountability, appointing generals and governors not because of bloodline, but because of talent. For a medieval world dominated by nobility and inherited privilege, this was revolutionary. He divided the empire into administrative units and placed skilled officials, sometimes Mongol, sometimes Chinese, Persian, or Uyghur, in charge. The empire functioned like a multi-ethnic administrative machine, coordinated across thousands of miles. Genghis Khan understood something crucial. Conquest wins territory. Administration keeps it. The Yasa, the Great Law. Genghis Khan introduced a legal code known as the Yasa. Though its full text is lost, its principles survived in records. Absolute loyalty to the Khan, protection of ambassadors and diplomats, severe punishment for theft and corruption, religious freedom, military discipline, fair distribution of war spoils, and heavy penalties for harming civilians without cause. The Yasa created a sense of order that allowed the empire to function despite its massive size and cultural diversity. Where other rulers imposed their religion or language, Genghis Khan imposed rules that made the empire predictable, stable, and economically powerful. Freedom of religion. Perhaps one of the most modern elements of Mongol rule was religious tolerance. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Taoists, and shamans lived under the same rule with equal respect. Priests, monks, and scholars from different faiths were often granted tax exemptions. Genghis Khan's view was simple. I do not care what god you worship. I care how loyal you are. In a world where kingdoms slaughtered each other over faith, this policy enabled commerce, diplomacy, and cultural exchange on an unprecedented scale. The Silk Road Renaissance. Before the Mongols, the Silk Road was dangerous. Robbers, corrupt officials, and constant warfare made long-distance trade unpredictable. Under the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, the Silk Road entered its golden age. Caravans traveled from China to Europe with guaranteed safety. Merchants of every background were protected by Mongol patrols and permitted to operate freely. The Yam relay system, with its chain of horse stations, created the fastest communication network in the world. For the first time, the continent functioned like a connected economic organism. Goods, ideas, technologies, and even diseases traveled across borders that once had been isolated by conflict. Gunpowder, printing techniques, medical knowledge, paper currency, astronomy, and mathematics moved across borders that once had been isolated by conflict. The Mongol Empire transformed Eurasia into a commercial superhighway long before modern globalization. Cultural exchange and knowledge transfer. The empire became a bridge linking worlds. Chinese engineering influenced the Middle East. Persian astronomy reached China. European travelers like Marco Polo entered a world larger than their imagination. Medical texts were translated across languages. Artistic styles blended and evolved. The Mongols did not create all this knowledge, but they built the roads, safety, and political coherence that allowed it to flourish. In many ways, they were the circulatory system of medieval civilization. The DNA of an empire.
Modern genetic studies reveal that a significant percentage of men in Central Asia carry a Y chromosome lineage tracing back to a single male who lived approximately 800 years ago. While debated, many scholars believe this lineage points to the descendants of Genghis Khan or his immediate male relatives, a sign of the political marriages, offspring, and influence that spread across the empire. His legacy is not only historical or cultural, it is biological. The empire of Genghis Khan was not simply a force of destruction. It was a network, a structure, a reordering of Eurasian civilization.
The influence of Genghis Khan did not vanish with the fall of his empire. Its remnants are woven into the political, cultural, and economic fabric of our world. Many of the systems that define modern civilization, from trade networks to military strategy, can trace their conceptual roots to the innovations of the Mongol era. Modern borders and nations. The Mongol expansions fractured and reshaped older political units. When the empire eventually divided into khanates, the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, the Chagatai Khanate, and the Yuan dynasty, they formed regional powers that would eventually evolve into modern nations. The territories of Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Mongolia, China's northern regions, and parts of Eastern Europe all bear the imprint of Mongol border-making and administrative division. Even the idea that Eurasia is a connected supercontinent, a continuous political theater, originates from Mongol unity. Military strategy and command structure. Modern military doctrines echo Mongol thinking. Principles such as mobility over static force, flexible formations, decentralized command, real-time communication, and intelligence-based warfare are now foundational to modern armies. The concept of commanders empowered to make local decisions instead of waiting for central orders was once a defining Mongol advantage. Today, it is standard military practice. Cultural interconnectivity and globalization. Before modern globalization, there was Mongol globalization. Under the Pax Mongolica, merchants could travel from Venice to Beijing with predictable security. This laid the psychological groundwork for later global trade networks, the kind that shaped the age of exploration and eventually the modern world economy. In many ways, the Mongol Empire served as a prototype of global civilization, a world where cultures met, exchanged, and transformed through interaction rather than isolation. Language influence. The Mongols did not impose a single language, but they created environments where multilingualism thrived. Persian became the administrative language in the Western Empire. Chinese continued to dominate in the East. Turkic languages spread across Central Asia. Mongolian remained the ruling language of authority. The result was a linguistic mosaic, an early reflection of cultural pluralism. Diplomacy, ambassadors, and safe passage. Genghis Khan viewed diplomats as sacred. Harming a messenger was considered a grave offense. This principle influenced later diplomatic customs, including the modern concept of diplomatic immunity and the international legal protection of ambassadors. The world began to accept the idea that communication between states must be preserved even in times of conflict. The psychological legacy, fear, and admiration. Genghis Khan occupies a contradictory space in world memory. To some, a brutal destroyer. To others, a genius unifier. To some cultures, a national hero. To others, a terror from the East. This duality reflects a deeper truth. Great figures are rarely simple. Their shadows stretch across centuries, shaping both myth and history. Mongolia's identity and national pride. Today in Mongolia,
Genghis Khan, or Chinggis Khan, is revered as the father of the nation. His face appears on currency. His name adorns airports, vodka, monuments, and institutions. He represents pride, unity, and ancestral achievement. To Mongolians, he is not simply a conqueror. He is a symbol of identity. The legacy of mobility and adaptability. Perhaps the greatest Mongol contribution was not a specific invention, but a mindset. Adapt, adopt, absorb. They were not rigid traditionalists. They learned from every culture they encountered and integrated useful elements into their civilization. In a rapidly changing modern world, this flexibility remains a model for innovation and leadership. An empire that connected humanity. The Mongol Empire did not last forever, yet the pathways it opened never fully closed. The Silk Road evolved into maritime routes, which evolved into colonial trade networks, which evolved into modern global commerce, which evolved into digital communication. In a strange irony of history, the man born in a remote nomadic camp helped set humanity on the course toward a connected world.
Behind the conquests, behind the armies, behind the rivers of history that flowed in his wake, there was a human being, a thinker, a strategist, a man shaped by trauma, loyalty, betrayal, and ambition. Understanding Genghis Khan requires stepping out of the myth and into the mind of Temujin. His charisma and presence. Accounts from foreign diplomats and allies describe Genghis Khan as a man of magnetic authority, not loud, not flamboyant, but commanding. He spoke in a quiet voice. He listened more than he talked. He observed before acting. His power was not in forceful speech, but in a presence that conveyed certainty. A leader whose decisions carried weight because he never made them lightly. His code of loyalty. Temujin was betrayed many times in youth, abandoned by tribe, hunted by rivals, and imprisoned by enemies. From these experiences, he developed a principle. Those who are loyal to me, I will be loyal to them. He rewarded loyalty fiercely. A bodyguard could become a general. A stable boy could become a commander. A captured enemy could become a trusted ally if he proved faithful. This reshaped Mongol society. Instead of being born into rank, leaders were made. His view on justice and order. Genghis Khan's sense of justice was unforgiving but not whimsical. He despised corruption. He despised betrayal. He despised aristocracies that took power for granted. If a soldier stole from a civilian, he could be executed. If a governor abused his power, he could lose everything. If a city surrendered, it could be spared. If a city resisted, it could be destroyed. To his enemies, this seemed barbaric. To his followers, it was fairness. His relationship with religion. Contrary to popular assumptions, Genghis Khan was not hostile to religion. He was deeply spiritual. Though he followed the traditional Mongol belief system, he invited priests of many faiths to debate, advise, and speak freely. He believed that faith is personal, loyalty is political. He wanted unity of empire, not unity of worship. The shadow of violence. One cannot discuss Genghis Khan without acknowledging the destruction his campaigns brought. Cities were burned, populations were slaughtered,
Trauma was inflicted that endured for generations. And yet, even in this violence, there was a pattern. It was strategic, not random, calculated, not emotional. He used terror as a weapon of deterrence to prevent greater conflicts by making resistance seem pointless. His family and succession. Genghis Khan valued family, yet approached it pragmatically. He fathered numerous children. Political marriages created alliances across tribes and nations. He also worked to train his sons as future rulers, though not all inherited his brilliance. Before his death, he warned them that keeping the empire united would be the true challenge. A challenge many argue they ultimately failed. An unsolved mystery, his death and burial. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, the cause of death remains uncertain. Wounds from battle? Illness? Injury from a fall? Or something else? His burial place is unknown. Legend says the funeral party killed anyone who saw the procession, and that horses were driven across his grave to erase all trace. A man who reshaped continents, vanished into the earth, unseen.
Genghis Khan's legacy is a mirror reflecting the perspectives of those who remember him. Across continents and centuries, he has been depicted as a barbaric destroyer, a brilliant military genius, a unifier of tribes, a visionary lawgiver, a national hero, a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition. Each culture interprets him differently, influenced by the scars he left and the systems he created. In Mongolia, Genghis Khan, or Chinggis Khan, is a national symbol of pride and unity. Statues, monuments, and currency celebrate him. He represents resilience, leadership, and the power of a single individual to shape history. In China, he is remembered both as a conqueror and as a founder of the Yuan dynasty. Chinese records highlight the Mongol impact on administration, trade, and governance. Yet his campaigns of destruction in northern China left lasting trauma in historical memory. In the long term, however, his empire facilitated trade, cultural exchange, and innovations that shaped Chinese history. In Persia and the Middle East, Persian historians often depict Genghis Khan as a devastating invader. Cities such as Bukhara and Samarkand were destroyed. Populations were massacred, creating deep historical scars. At the same time, Persian administration and culture were later integrated into the Mongol Empire, influencing its legal systems, governance, and scholarship. In Europe, Europeans saw the Mongols as a distant terror. Tales of the Mongol Horde reached Venice, Hungary, and Poland. The Mongol threat forced European kingdoms to rethink military strategy and diplomacy. Fear of invasion colored European literature, folklore, and political thought for decades. Myth versus reality. Genghis Khan's image has often been magnified into legend. Stories exaggerate cruelty, size of armies, and influence. Folklore sometimes elevates his intelligence to almost supernatural levels. This duality, fear and admiration, makes him a timeless figure in world history. The historian's perspective. Modern historians attempt to balance myth and fact. Yes, he was brutal. Yes, he destroyed cities and killed thousands. But he was also a visionary strategist, an innovative administrator, and a cultural connector. Understanding Genghis Khan requires accepting complexity. A man who was neither wholly villain nor wholly hero,
but a force of history whose impact resonates to this day.
Genghis Khan's empire did more than conquer lands. It connected the world in ways that still echo today. The Mongol influence extends far beyond battlefields into commerce, knowledge, governance, and cultural exchange. Trade and economic transformation. Before the Mongols, long-distance trade was perilous. Caravans risked robbery, banditry, and unstable politics. The Mongols introduced the Pax Mongolica, a period of relative peace across the empire. Merchants traveled from China to Europe under Mongol protection. Silk, spices, precious metals, and textiles flowed along secure routes. Trade networks became faster, safer, and more organized. This created the first truly transcontinental economic network, a precursor to modern globalization. Science and knowledge exchange. The empire acted as a conduit for knowledge. Chinese inventions like gunpowder and printing reached the Middle East and Europe. Persian astronomy, mathematics, and medicine moved eastward. Cultural and scientific ideas traveled alongside merchants, diplomats, and scholars. The Mongol Empire effectively accelerated the spread of technology and information, shortening the time it took innovations to influence the wider world. Governance and law. Genghis Khan's administrative policies influenced later governments. Meritocracy and appointments, legal codification through the yasa, systems for communication and taxation, promotion of religious and cultural tolerance. These practices served as a blueprint for centralized rule over diverse populations, influencing governance models far beyond the Mongol era. Cultural exchange and identity. By uniting a vast array of peoples under one political framework, the Mongols created a melting pot of cultures. Artistic styles blended across regions. Languages and literature merged. Trade introduced new foods, textiles, and tools. Diplomacy encouraged dialogue between previously isolated societies. This cultural fluidity is a precursor to the modern concept of interconnected civilizations. The genetic legacy. Genghis Khan's influence persists biologically. A significant proportion of men in Central Asia carry Y chromosome lineages linked to him or his direct descendants. This genetic footprint is a living reminder of his social and reproductive policies, which spread across vast territories. Lessons for the modern world. Genghis Khan's life and empire teach enduring lessons. Adaptability. Incorporate useful ideas from every culture encountered. Meritocracy. Reward talent over lineage. Communication and intelligence. Coordination and information are as powerful as armies. Visionary leadership. Transform chaos into organized systems. His strategies, policies, and systems continue to influence military thinking, economic planning, and cross-cultural diplomacy. Conclusion: a force of history. Genghis Khan remains one of the most enigmatic figures in human history. A warrior who united the steppes, a lawmaker who brought order to chaos, a trader and facilitator who connected civilizations, a figure who inspires fear, admiration, and debate alike. The Mongol Empire may have fallen, but its echoes resonate through modern commerce, governance, culture, and even genetics. Genghis Khan's story is not just about the past. It is a mirror reflecting how individuals can reshape the world, how leadership, vision, and ambition leave legacies that endure far beyond a lifetime.
To truly understand Genghis Khan's impact, we must examine specific examples of his campaigns, policies, and the ripple effects they created across centuries. The Siege of Zhengdu, also known as Beijing, mastering siege warfare. In 1215, Genghis Khan's forces besieged Zhengdu, the Jin dynasty capital. Unlike traditional nomadic armies, the Mongols adopted advanced siege techniques. Chinese engineers were incorporated to build catapults, battering rams, and siege towers. The Mongols demonstrated adaptability, combining their mobility with technology learned from conquered peoples. This siege showcased a major shift in Mongol warfare, from purely mobile cavalry attacks to combined arms strategies, incorporating engineering, logistics, and psychological pressure. The fall of Zhengdu set a precedent. Mongols were no longer simply raiders, they were strategic conquerors capable of sophisticated military campaigns. The conquest of Khwarezm, diplomacy and retribution. The Khwarezm Empire, modern-day Iran, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, illustrates Genghis Khan's approach to diplomacy and consequences. Initial contact, trade and diplomacy. Violation, Khwarezmian governor executed Mongol envoys. Response was a calculated multi-front invasion that decimated cities. This campaign demonstrates the dual strategy of mercy and terror. Obey and you prosper. Resist and destruction follows. It created a psychological framework that would influence both Mongol rule and modern concepts of deterrence. The Silk Road, commerce as conquest. Under Mongol rule, the Silk Road became more than a trade route. It was an artery of civilization. Goods flowed faster and safer than ever before. Merchants, scholars, and diplomats traveled with protection. Knowledge of astronomy, medicine, and technology spread widely. This period accelerated global interconnectivity, essentially laying the foundation for the later Age of Exploration. Legal innovation, the Yasa in practice. The Yasa codified rules for the empire, military discipline, trade regulations, protection for diplomats, religious freedom, punishments for corruption and theft. The Yasa allowed a vast, multi-ethnic empire to function cohesively centuries before centralized bureaucracies became common in Europe or Asia. This demonstrates that Genghis Khan's legacy is not just military, but administrative and legal. Influence on warfare across centuries. Many modern military strategies trace conceptual roots to Mongol innovations. Rapid mobility and intelligence networks mirror modern reconnaissance techniques. Psychological operations resemble modern strategic intimidation. Meritocratic command foreshadows contemporary military leadership structures. Even today, military academies study Mongol campaigns to understand coordination, adaptability, and psychological impact. Cultural diffusion and knowledge exchange. Mongol rule created a cross-cultural ecosystem. Persian art influenced Chinese architecture. Chinese medicine and engineering spread westward. European travelers like Marco Polo experienced and recorded this interconnected world. This diffusion illustrates Genghis Khan's indirect impact on science, technology, and cultural integration across continents. The modern relevance. Today, Genghis Khan's legacy can be seen in trade networks spanning continents, legal and administrative frameworks in Eurasia, military tactics emphasizing speed, intelligence, and adaptability, cultural exchanges, and globalization. The empire demonstrated that visionary leadership can reshape entire continents, influencing systems far beyond an individual's lifetime.
Genghis Khan's story is not merely a tale of conquest, but a reflection of human potential, ambition, and complexity. To understand him is to understand how a single individual can reshape the destiny of continents. Leadership beyond time. What set Genghis Khan apart was vision. He saw beyond tribal rivalries. He understood that loyalty, skill, and intelligence mattered more than birthright.
He embraced ideas from every culture he encountered. Modern leaders, historians, and strategists study his life because it offers timeless lessons in leadership, strategy, and adaptability. The duality of destruction and creation. Genghis Khan was both a destroyer and a creator. Destruction. Cities fell, populations suffered, and entire civilizations were reshaped. Creation. Trade flourished, knowledge spread, laws were codified, and an interconnected world emerged. This duality is key to understanding the complexity of historical impact. Great figures are rarely wholly good or evil. They exist in the gray area between ambition, necessity, and vision. The psychological legacy. Fear and respect traveled faster than armies. The Mongols mastered psychological warfare to minimize resistance, increase efficiency, and secure compliance. This principle resonates today. Influence often relies as much on perception as on power. The Mongol Empire demonstrated that reputation, strategy, and calculated intimidation can reshape societies without constant bloodshed. Connectivity and globalization. The Mongol Empire can be considered a precursor to the modern globalized world. Trade routes were safer and faster. Cultures, technologies, and ideas moved freely. Diplomacy and law began to transcend local boundaries. Without the Mongol facilitation of communication and commerce, the world might have evolved slower, more isolated, and less interconnected. The enduring mythos. Genghis Khan's name still resonates. In Mongolia, he is revered as a father of the nation. In China, he is remembered as a ruler and conqueror. In Persia and Central Asia, he is both feared and studied. In Europe, he became the embodiment of the East, both exotic and terrifying. This diversity of perception is itself a part of his legacy. He shaped not just the physical world, but the mental and cultural landscapes of civilizations. Lessons for humanity. From his life, modern societies can draw wisdom, adaptability, learn and integrate knowledge from others. Meritocracy, reward talent and loyalty over privilege. Strategic vision, plan not just for immediate gain, but long-term impact. Balance of fear and respect, understand human psychology in leadership. Legacy through systems, true influence comes from structures and ideas, not merely conquest. Closing narration. Cinematic tone. Genghis Khan was more than a man. He was a force of history, a phenomenon that reshaped continents and cultures. His armies rode across the steppes and plains, but his ideas, laws, and vision traveled even farther, through trade, governance, culture, and memory. To study Genghis Khan is to study the power of vision, leadership, and resilience, and to understand that even in a single lifetime, one person can leave a mark on the entire world. This marks the culmination of the epic narrative, but the story of his influence is endless. In every trade route, every city, every law, and even in the DNA of millions, the echoes of Genghis Khan still endure. The global consequences of Mongol expansion. Political, economic, and cultural ripple effects. Genghis Khan's empire did not simply disappear when his sons and grandsons divided it. The ripples of his rule shaped the political and cultural landscape of Eurasia for centuries. Political fragmentation and state formation. After Genghis Khan's death, the Mongol Empire split into four main khanates. the Yuan dynasty in China, established by his grandson Kublai Khan, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Golden Horde in Russia, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. Each of these khanates became the seed of future nations, influencing borders, governance systems, and political traditions. Russia's later centralization and the rise of Moscow as a power hub can be traced back to Mongol influence. Persia experienced shifts in administration, law, and culture under Mongol rule, laying foundations for subsequent dynasties. China's Yuan dynasty integrated Mongol, Chinese, and foreign administrative practices, influencing governance for centuries. Trade and the rise of a connected world. Under Mongol protection, trade networks flourished like never before. Caravans carried silk, spices, and precious metals across thousands of kilometers. The Silk Road reached its golden age, connecting East Asia, Central Asia, and Europe. Merchants traveled safely across borders, facilitating economic and cultural exchange. This connectivity was crucial. Ideas, technologies, and knowledge moved along these routes. Gunpowder, printing techniques, and navigational tools spread westward. Persian mathematics, astronomy, and medicine traveled eastward. Artistic styles and architectural methods blended across cultures. Cultural and religious impact. The Mongol Empire was remarkably tolerant of religions, allowing Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Taoists, and shamans to coexist. Religious tolerance facilitated scholarly collaboration and cultural exchange. Monuments, artworks, and literature from diverse regions survived and evolved under Mongol oversight. Temples, mosques, and monasteries often received tax exemptions, encouraging cultural preservation. This environment laid the groundwork for cross-cultural fusion, creating a legacy of pluralism still visible in Central Asia today. Technological and knowledge transfer. The Mongols were adept at absorbing and implementing technology. Siege engineering, learned from Chinese specialists, revolutionized military campaigns in Persia and Europe. Navigation techniques and astronomy were shared across borders, influencing trade and exploration. Knowledge of agriculture, irrigation, and urban planning spread from one region to another. In essence, Genghis Khan's empire became a circulatory system for civilization, distributing ideas, innovations, and culture at unprecedented speed.
The Mongol military strategies under Genghis Khan influenced armies long after his death. Rapid cavalry mobility enabled long-distance campaigns that no contemporary army could match. Psychological warfare. Fear was a weapon as effective as any sword or arrow. Decentralized command. Local generals were empowered to make strategic decisions, increasing battlefield efficiency. Intelligence and communication networks. The YAM system allowed orders to travel faster than traditional couriers, enabling coordinated campaigns across vast territories. These principles informed later military tactics, from steppe armies in Eastern Europe to modern doctrines, emphasizing speed, communication, and psychological operations. The story of Genghis Khan is a blend of fact and legend, shaped by those who wrote about him. In Mongolia, he is celebrated as a unifying father figure and national hero. In Persia and the Middle East, he is often remembered as a devastating conqueror. In China, he is a founder of the Yuan dynasty, remembered for governance and administration. In Europe, he is the embodiment of the distant Eastern threat, appearing in chronicles as both mythical and terrifying. This diversity of perception demonstrates the enduring power of narrative, showing how history is as much about memory as it is about facts. Beyond conquest, Genghis Khan's empire created systems that persisted long after Mongol rule ended. The Silk Road continued to facilitate global trade for centuries. Legal codes influenced subsequent dynasties and empires, spreading ideas of order, justice, and governance. Cities rebuilt after conquest often retained Mongol urban planning and administration. Artistic and scientific exchanges laid the foundation for Renaissance-era knowledge flows from east to west. Genghis Khan's life raises questions still relevant today. How much of leadership is born versus forged through hardship? Can fear and respect coexist as tools of governance? How does a single individual's vision reshape continents, cultures, and generations? His empire teaches that power, vision, and adaptability leave long-lasting marks on not only territory, but in laws, commerce, knowledge, and human memory. Even today, his influence persists. In Mongolia, through statues, festivals, and national identity. In global trade, through the foundations of connectivity and economic networks. In military studies, through lessons in strategy, mobility, and intelligence. In science and culture, through the movement of ideas and innovations across continents. In genetics, through the Y chromosome lineage spreading across Central Asia. Genghis Khan's story is both ancient and modern, a testament to how vision, leadership, and determination can echo across centuries, leaving footprints on landscapes, societies, and human consciousness that cannot be erased.
Genghis Khan was a child of the steppe, forged by hardship, a unifier of tribes and a creator of empire, a strategist, lawgiver, and visionary leader, a destroyer and a preserver, a figure of terror and respect, a force that reshaped trade, culture, law, governance, and even human genetics. His legacy endures in borders, cities, trade routes, knowledge, and stories, reminding us that one individual's vision can reshape the world forever. Visuals: panoramic shots of the Mongolian steppe fading into modern cities. Caravans, railroads, and shipping lanes tracing ancient trade routes. Festivals, monuments, and scholars studying Mongol history. Overlay of modern maps highlighting connectivity. Narration tone: grand, reflective, awe-inspiring. Music: orchestral finale blending traditional Mongolian instruments with modern symphonic crescendos. Sound design: wind over steppes, horse hooves, city life, blending past and present. The documentary ends not with a period, but with a continuing legacy, reminding viewers that the story of Genghis Khan is still alive in the modern world. Detailed campaign analysis. Major battles, strategies, and tactical genius of Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan's military campaigns are a masterclass in strategy, adaptability, and psychological warfare. Understanding his battles provides insight into how he reshaped Eurasia and secured a lasting legacy. Battle of the Badgermouth, 1197 to 1201. Early Unification Wars. Context: Temujin fought against rival Mongol tribes to consolidate his power. Strategy: used merit-based command and coordinated tribal alliances. Tactics: deception and mobility, feigning retreats to lure enemies into traps. Outcome: consolidated fragmented tribes, establishing Temujin as a dominant leader on the steppes.
This early campaign demonstrates the combination of psychological manipulation and disciplined cavalry that would define his later conquests.
Temujin sought to eliminate tribes that had kidnapped his family or posed threats. Preemptive strikes and coordinated attacks across multiple fronts. Rapid, surprise cavalry assaults combined with intelligence from scouts eliminated key rivals, strengthening his political base and reputation. The campaign reinforced a pattern: swift, decisive action backed by superior intelligence. Battle of Khawarizm, 1219 to 1221. Expansion into Persia. The Khawarizm Empire insulted Mongol envoys, prompting invasion. Multi-pronged assault with simultaneous attacks on major cities. Siege warfare, coordination with engineers, and psychological terror to encourage surrender. Entire cities fell. Khwarizmian power was destroyed. This campaign illustrates Genghis Khan's blend of diplomacy, military innovation, and punitive strategy. Invasion of northern China, 1211 to 1215. Campaign against the Jin dynasty. Strategy: divide and conquer, isolating cities and cutting supply lines. Tactics: siege engineering, incorporation of Chinese expertise in warfare, and relentless mobility. Outcome: fall of Zhongdu, Beijing, opening the path to China and establishing the Mongols as a major Eurasian power. Battles against the Western Xia, 1205 to 1227. Context: the Western Xia threatened Mongol trade routes. Strategy: economic disruption combined with sustained military campaigns. Tactics: starvation sieges, mobile cavalry raids, and intimidation tactics. Outcome: the Western Xia surrendered multiple times, demonstrating Mongol ability to enforce political dominance with minimal direct confrontation when possible. Psychological warfare techniques. Across all campaigns, Genghis Khan employed psychological strategies. Propaganda of fear. Rumors of unstoppable Mongol forces spread ahead of armies. Selective mercy. Cities that surrendered were spared, reinforcing compliance. Decapitation tactics, targeting leaders while leaving the population intact to consolidate control. These strategies reduced resistance, preserved resources, and accelerated empire expansion. Coordination and communication. Yam relay system. Horse-mounted couriers enabled rapid communication across thousands of miles. Local autonomy. Commanders could make decisions without waiting for central approval. Intelligence networks. Spies and informants provided information on enemy movements and morale. This advanced organizational system was unprecedented for its time, allowing coordinated multi-front campaigns across vast distances.
The Mongols were not only warriors, they were administrators and logisticians. Sustaining an empire across 24 million square kilometers required meticulous planning. Mongol logistics and empire management. Sustaining a massive empire through organization and innovation. Genghis Khan's genius was not limited to warfare. The empire's longevity and stability depended on meticulous logistics, governance, and infrastructure that enabled control over millions of people across vast territories. The Yam relay system, communication across continents. Purpose: rapid communication for military orders, trade coordination, and administrative control. Structure: a network of relay stations approximately every 25 to 30 miles, staffed with fresh horses and riders. This system is comparable to a medieval version of modern postal and telecommunication networks, ensuring efficiency across the empire. Supply and logistics. Military supply. Mongol armies carried minimal equipment, relying on speed and foraging. Stockpiles. Key locations along the Silk Road had provisions, horses, and weapons stored strategically.
This allowed the Mongols to conduct prolonged campaigns far from their homeland, maintaining momentum and avoiding attrition that often doomed other armies. Administrative divisions. The empire was divided into provinces and districts, each overseen by trusted officials. Officials were chosen based on competence, loyalty, and merit, not lineage. Local populations were integrated into administrative tasks, including tax collection, trade regulation, and law enforcement. This approach created a functional bureaucracy that maintained order over a culturally diverse empire. Taxation and trade policies. Mongol rulers implemented standardized taxes and duties, ensuring revenue without stifling trade. Merchants traveling along the Silk Road were protected and incentivized with reduced taxation. This policy encouraged economic growth and cultural exchange, reinforcing imperial stability. Law, order, and the Yasa. The Yasa was the Mongol legal code, covering military discipline, civil law, taxation, trade, and social conduct. It codified religious tolerance, protection of diplomats, and strict penalties for corruption or theft. While enforcement varied, the existence of a centralized legal framework allowed the empire to function cohesively, despite ethnic and cultural diversity.
Cultural integration and tolerance. Mongols promoted religious and cultural pluralism, allowing multiple faiths to coexist. Artisans, scholars, and traders from different regions were encouraged to settle in new cities. This created hubs of intellectual and cultural activity, facilitating exchange of technology, art, and ideas across the empire. Legacy of governance. Genghis Khan's approach to empire management had enduring influence. Meritocratic leadership. Competence became valued over birthright. Efficient bureaucracy. Enabled rule over diverse populations. Infrastructure investment. Roads, postal systems, and urban planning facilitated governance and commerce. Legal and economic frameworks promoted stability and growth. The Mongol Empire became a model of how a vast, multi-ethnic empire could function effectively centuries before similar systems emerged elsewhere. The Mongol Empire transformed the Silk Road into a thriving economic and cultural highway, creating one of history's first globalized systems. Merchants traveled safely across deserts, mountains, and hostile territories. Ideas, religions, technologies, and art flowed freely between East and West. Cities along trade routes flourished, becoming centers of innovation, learning, and wealth. Genghis Khan's policies turned commerce into a tool of empire, fostering prosperity and integration that extended far beyond his lifetime. The Mongol Empire was more than conquest. It became a vast network for exchanging ideas, technologies, and culture across continents. Science and astronomy. Persian and Chinese scholars collaborated under Mongol rule. Astronomy advanced as data from multiple regions were shared. Calendars, star charts, and navigation techniques improved, aiding both agriculture and long-distance travel. The Mongol Empire created a scientific bridge between East and West, accelerating knowledge transfer centuries before the European Renaissance. Medicine and healthcare. Traditional Chinese medicine, Persian medical knowledge, and local practices were exchanged widely. Mongol rulers encouraged physicians to move between cities and courts, creating medical hubs. Knowledge of herbal remedies, surgical techniques, and sanitation traveled along trade routes. This exchange enhanced public health and laid foundations for more systematic medical knowledge. Technological transfer. Gunpowder spread westward from China into the Middle East and Europe.
Papermaking and printing techniques facilitated record-keeping and scholarship. Engineering techniques, particularly for siegecraft and infrastructure, were shared among Mongol engineers and local experts. These transfers reshaped warfare, governance, and culture, influencing societies far beyond Mongolia. Art and architecture. Artistic styles from Persia, China, and Central Asia blended under Mongol patronage. Miniature painting, calligraphy, and architectural design spread across cities in the empire. Cultural hubs like Karakorum, Samarkand, and Bukhara became centers of innovation. This fusion produced unique aesthetic traditions still studied in art history today. Religious and philosophical exchange. Mongols practiced religious tolerance, allowing Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Taoists, and shamans to coexist. Scholars and clerics traveled freely, debating, teaching, and writing. Philosophical ideas, ethical systems, and theological texts circulated along the Silk Road. This environment encouraged intellectual diversity, strengthening cross-cultural understanding. The Silk Road as a cultural highway. Beyond goods, the Silk Road became a highway for ideas, innovations, and social customs. Music, poetry, cuisine, and fashion were shared across continents. Diplomatic and trade networks created early forms of globalization, centuries before the modern era. Legacy in knowledge and culture. Many modern sciences, technologies, and arts owe their diffusion to Mongol policies of mobility and openness. The empire accelerated human exchange, shortening the distance between cultures and facilitating global development. Cities once controlled by the Mongols became crossroads of knowledge, influencing European exploration and trade. The Mongol Empire demonstrates that conquest can be a vehicle for cultural and technological flourishing, not just destruction.
Genghis Khan's campaigns left an enduring mark on human psychology, leadership principles, and societal structures. Merit-based promotions ensured that talent and loyalty mattered more than birth. Leaders were trained to adapt, innovate, and make rapid decisions. Centralized vision combined with decentralized execution made the Mongols highly effective. These principles inform modern leadership and organizational theory today. Reputation alone often caused cities to surrender without battle. Stories of Mongol brutality spread faster than armies, instilling fear as a tool of control. The calculated balance of terror and mercy reduced resistance and preserved resources. This understanding of psychology in conflict influenced military thinking for centuries. Mongol policies allowed diverse peoples to coexist under one system. Ethnic, linguistic, and religious diversity was managed through tolerance, local autonomy, and standardized laws. This created multi-ethnic administrative structures that inspired future empires. Genghis Khan's empire shows how human systems can be designed for both control and collaboration. The image of Genghis Khan varies. Hero in Mongolia, villain in Persia, founding ruler in China, exotic threat in Europe. Legends amplified his deeds, blending fact and narrative, creating a historical figure larger than life. The Mongol legacy persists not only in history books, but in culture, folklore, and global memory. Adaptability. Success requires learning from different cultures. Meritocracy. Rewarding talent over lineage ensures resilience. Global connectivity. Commerce, ideas, and networks shape civilization as much as armies. Leadership. Strategic vision combined with psychological insight can influence entire regions. Genghis Khan's life teaches that individual vision, when executed strategically, can ripple across centuries and continents.
Borders. Modern Central Asia, China, Russia, and Persia were shaped by Mongol campaigns. Trade. Foundations of global commerce trace back to Mongol-era Silk Road security. Governance. Bureaucratic systems, merit-based promotions, and codified law influenced future states. Science and technology. Knowledge transfer accelerated innovations in Europe and Asia. Culture. Religious tolerance, artistic fusion, and intellectual exchange created enduring legacies. Genghis Khan's influence transcends time. His empire was not just a historical entity, it was a catalyst for the interconnected, globalized world we live in today. Genghis Khan's influence extends beyond politics, trade, and culture. It reaches into the very DNA of millions of people. Genetic studies reveal that roughly 8% of men in a vast region of Central Asia carry a Y chromosome lineage linked to Genghis Khan and his male descendants. This lineage spans from Mongolia through Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and even parts of northern China. The spread reflects both his personal reproductive success and the Mongol policy of elite men taking multiple wives and concubines across conquered territories. Mongol expansion affected the demographics of entire regions. Conquered populations were often displaced, absorbed, or resettled strategically. Some cities experienced depopulation during campaigns, followed by resettlement by loyal Mongol or allied populations. This contributed to the ethnic and cultural mosaic seen in Central Asia today. Mongol rule encouraged intermarriage, alliance building, and cultural exchange. Modern Central Asian identity reflects a blend of Mongol, Turkic, Persian, and Chinese heritage. In Mongolia, Genghis Khan remains a central figure of national identity, shaping modern political and cultural narratives. Mongol campaigns caused mass migrations, either voluntary or forced. Trade, administration, and military deployments led to population movement across Eurasia. These migrations accelerated the spread of languages, technologies, and religious practices, further cementing the Mongol legacy in human history. Leadership and conquest can leave literal genetic footprints across generations. Policies of governance, reproduction, and social organization can shape population structure for centuries. Genghis Khan's empire was not just a historical phenomenon, it set the stage for the modern globalized world. Trade networks, security and standardization of the Silk Road influenced commerce for centuries. Governance, meritocracy, law codes, and administrative divisions inspired later empires. Cultural exchange, art, science, religion, and philosophy spread widely, creating a foundation for cross-cultural interaction. Military thought, strategy, mobility, and psychological warfare influenced later European and Asian armies. Genetic legacy, millions carry his lineage, a living testament to his reach. Modern recognition. Statues and monuments honor him in Mongolia. Scholars worldwide study his military campaigns and administrative innovations. Historians debate his morality, leadership style, and impact, reflecting the complexity of his legacy. Genghis Khan is remembered not merely for conquest, but for creating systems, ideas, and connections that endure today. True legacy is measured by systems, culture, and knowledge, not just territory. Leadership combined with vision, adaptability, and intelligence leaves lasting impressions on humanity. Genghis Khan's life exemplifies how individual action can ripple through centuries, reshaping societies far beyond one's lifespan. Connectivity matters. Empires that facilitate trade and communication endure. Merit and capability drive stability. Societies function best when leadership rewards skill over lineage. Knowledge transfer accelerates progress. Exchange of science, art, and ideas shapes civilizations. Power leaves imprints beyond politics. Genetics, culture, and memory all carry forward influence. The Mongol Empire was both destructive and constructive, but its ultimate mark is in how it reshaped humanity's trajectory. Genghis Khan's story is a blend of myth, history, and enduring influence. A child of the steppes who rose through hardship, a conqueror whose campaigns reshaped continents, a leader whose administrative genius enabled a vast empire to function, a cultural bridge connecting East and West, a biological and demographic force whose legacy is still measurable today. Genghis Khan demonstrates that history is not merely about events, but about the systems, ideas, and people shaped by vision, strategy, and ambition. His empire may have fragmented, but its echoes resonate in trade, governance, culture, warfare, and genetics, proving that a single individual can leave a permanent imprint on the world. If you want, I can continue with Part 32, going into specific case studies of cultural exchanges, technological transfers, and their influence on Europe and Asia, which could add highly detailed content for documentary storytelling. Genghis Khan's conquests did more than expand territory. They created a network that allowed ideas, technologies, and culture to flow freely across Eurasia. These case studies illustrate the tangible impacts of Mongol rule on civilization. Origin: China, centuries before Mongol conquests. Transmission: Mongol armies and trade networks brought gunpowder westward. Impact: introduced new military technologies to the Middle East and Europe, paving the way for revolutionary changes in warfare, including cannons and firearms. This demonstrates how conquest can accelerate technological diffusion, altering global military history. Origin: China, using woodblock printing. Transmission: Mongols facilitated the movement of printers, texts, and techniques westward. Impact: Europe eventually adopted these innovations, culminating in the printing revolution of the 15th century. The Mongols acted as cultural intermediaries, enabling the cross-continental flow of knowledge. Exchange: Persian astronomers and Chinese scholars collaborated under Mongol rule. Transmission: Star charts, mathematical methods, and navigational knowledge moved along trade and diplomatic channels. Impact: Advanced understanding of astronomy in Europe and the Middle East, improving navigation, trade, and calendrical systems. The empire became a scientific network bridging civilizations centuries before global research networks existed. Mongol tolerance allowed physicians from multiple traditions to practice and exchange knowledge. Herbal medicine, surgical techniques, and preventative health strategies spread from east to west. Cities along the Silk Road became medical hubs where patients and scholars accessed combined expertise. This laid foundations for more systematic medical practices in Eurasia. Mongol cities became crossroads of style. Persian tilework, Chinese pagodas, and Central Asian motifs blended. Miniature painting, calligraphy, and decorative arts influenced emerging aesthetic traditions in regions far from their origin. This cultural fusion enriched civilizations, creating unique art forms and architectural styles. Mongol policies encouraged dialogue between religions. Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Taoism, and shamanism coexisted. Philosophical ideas traveled with scholars and merchants, influencing ethical systems, governance philosophies, and literature. The empire became a melting pot for intellectual development, fostering tolerance and innovation. Innovations accelerated due to the security, communication, and administrative systems of the Mongol Empire. Ideas that once would have taken decades or centuries to spread traveled across continents in years. This rapid diffusion of knowledge shaped the trajectory of Europe and Asia, influencing the Renaissance, technological advancement, and globalization. Empires as conduits. Genghis Khan's empire was a vehicle for human progress, not just conquest. Cross-cultural collaboration. Knowledge thrives when boundaries are removed and diversity is embraced. Security matters.
Trade and intellectual exchange flourished because the Mongols enforced law and protected networks. Legacy beyond borders. The impacts of these exchanges can be traced in science, art, medicine, and warfare across multiple continents.
Genghis Khan's empire demonstrates that globalization is not a modern invention. Trade under Mongol rule was organized, secure, and widespread. Caravans, ports, and cities became nodes of commerce, culture, and knowledge. Ideas, religions, and technologies traveled faster and more reliably than ever before. The Mongols created a framework for intercontinental exchange, a prototype for today's interconnected world. Genghis Khan's empire was not just about armies and conquests. It created thriving urban centers that became engines of commerce, culture, and governance. Role: political and administrative heart of the empire. Features: palaces, administrative offices, trade centers, and temples for multiple religions. Significance: served as a model for multi-ethnic governance, showcasing Mongol tolerance and organization. Legacy: excavations reveal a city planned for efficiency, defense, and cultural coexistence, highlighting the administrative sophistication of Genghis Khan's rule. Location: modern Uzbekistan, along the Silk Road. Economic role: key trade hub linking China, Persia, and Europe. Cultural role: Islamic scholarship flourished under Mongol protection. Libraries, mosques, and markets thrived. Impact: Bukhara exemplifies how Mongol governance fostered economic growth and intellectual exchange, encouraging merchants and scholars to travel safely. Samarkand. Role: strategic and cultural hub connecting East and West. Trade: served as a collection and redistribution point for goods from multiple regions. Culture: art, architecture, and craftsmanship combined Chinese, Persian, and Central Asian styles. Legacy: Samarkand became a symbol of the empire's integration strategy, blending commerce, culture, and learning. Context: conquered and initially devastated by Mongols in 1258, after Genghis Khan's death under Hulagu Khan. Reconstruction: later Mongol rulers invested in rebuilding infrastructure, allowing trade and scholarship to resume. Significance: demonstrates Mongol pragmatism. Cities could be destroyed or rebuilt depending on political and economic utility. Role: summer palace of Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson. Features: architectural splendor, gardens, and administrative centers. Cultural importance: blended Chinese, Mongol, and other cultural influences, symbolizing imperial sophistication and reach. Strategic locations: near rivers, trade routes, or resource hubs. Multi-ethnic populations: integration of locals, merchants, scholars, and artisans. Economic hubs: facilitated trade, taxation, and production. Cultural centers: encouraged art, science, and religious tolerance.
Governance: efficient administration through appointed governors, tax collectors, and legal enforcement. Integration: cities were tools for consolidating power and fostering cooperation. Economic incentive: trade and infrastructure were used to encourage loyalty and growth. Cultural preservation: diverse traditions coexisted, creating a melting pot of ideas and innovation. Security and efficiency: roads, fortifications, and administrative networks ensured order and protection. Mongol cities were connected by roads, caravan stations, and river networks. Trade routes allowed rapid movement of goods, troops, and information, increasing imperial cohesion. Economic hubs became cultural conduits, linking distant regions and fostering innovation. The Mongol urban strategy shows that cities were more than settlements. They were instruments of empire, designed to maximize economic, cultural, and political influence. The Mongol Empire's influence extended far beyond conquest and administration. It became a cultural and intellectual bridge across continents, facilitating diplomacy, artistic expression, and religious exchange. Mongols often forged alliances through marriage, trade, and diplomacy, rather than solely through warfare. Envoys traveled across the empire and beyond, carrying messages, gifts, and ideas. Cities became hubs for diplomatic activity, hosting delegations from China, Persia, India, the Middle East, and Europe. This diplomacy strengthened networks of trust, trade, and political influence, showcasing the Mongols' strategic use of culture as a tool of empire. Genghis Khan and his successors implemented religious freedom, allowing Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Taoists, and shamans to coexist. Temples, mosques, and monasteries often received tax exemptions and imperial protection. Religious scholars traveled freely, sharing philosophy, ethics, and scientific knowledge. This tolerance created a unique environment for cross-cultural understanding and intellectual collaboration. Mongol rulers supported architecture, painting, metalwork, and textiles from conquered cultures. Persian, Chinese, and Central Asian artistic styles blended in cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Karakoram. Court art often celebrated military conquest, cosmopolitanism, and diplomacy, creating works that inspired future generations. Art under Mongol rule was not just decoration. It was a medium of communication, prestige, and cultural integration. Scholars, engineers, and artisans were encouraged to move between cities and courts, sharing knowledge. Innovations in astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and engineering spread across Eurasia via Mongol networks. Mongol administration valued meritocracy, allowing talented individuals from different regions to influence policy and technology. The empire became a laboratory for intellectual innovation, fostering learning that transcended borders. Mongol officials often learned multiple languages to manage diverse populations. Translation of texts across Chinese, Persian, Mongolian, and Arabic preserved knowledge and enabled cross-cultural communication. Literacy, record-keeping, and documentation were central to effective governance, enhancing trade and diplomacy. Mongol courts celebrated religious and seasonal festivals, incorporating practices from multiple traditions. These gatherings facilitated social cohesion and cultural exchange, reinforcing loyalty among diverse populations.
Music, dance, and ritual became vehicles for political and cultural messaging, blending symbolism and celebration. Mongol patronage preserved and transmitted knowledge, influencing future civilizations. Artistic fusion led to distinctive cultural traditions, seen in architecture, ceramics, and textiles. Intellectual exchange accelerated scientific and philosophical advancements, contributing to later global developments. Genghis Khan's empire demonstrates that power and culture can coexist, with conquest facilitating a unique period of global intellectual integration. The wind howls across the endless Mongolian steppes, carrying whispers of hooves from centuries past. The sun sets in a blood-orange sky, casting long shadows over the grasslands where a boy once ran barefoot, dreaming of greatness. That boy, Temujin, rose from the dust and struggle of his childhood to become Genghis Khan, a force that reshaped the world. The epic tale of a visionary. From the small tribes of the Mongolian steppes, he forged an empire that spanned continents. Rivers, deserts, and mountains did not deter him. Cities fell, armies trembled, and yet he was not only a conqueror, he was a lawgiver, a visionary, a bridge between civilizations. He did not merely wield the sword, he wielded ideas, systems, and people. Under his rule, trade flourished across the Silk Road, carrying silk, spices, and knowledge to distant lands. Scholars, artisans, and merchants mingled across cultures, creating an unprecedented network of human exchange. His strategies in war, diplomacy, and governance echoed far beyond his lifetime, influencing nations, armies, and leaders for centuries. The legacy of Genghis Khan is written not only in maps and monuments, but in genetic lines, cities, and human history itself. His life reminds us that one vision, when pursued with courage, intelligence, and perseverance, can reverberate through eternity. The legendary closing words. And so, as the echoes of the past merge with the present, the story of Genghis Khan leaves us with a truth as vast as the steppes themselves. The greatest legacy of a leader is not the land he conquers, but the world he awakens. The steppes are silent once more, yet the thunder of his hooves lingers in every trade route, every law, every idea that shaped the modern world. His tale is not finished. It lives on in the heartbeat of history, in the courage of visionaries, and in the eternal dance between ambition and destiny. Genghis Khan's story ends not as a period in a history book, but as a living legend, a reminder that the spirit of a single individual can reshape continents, challenge time, and become immortal in the saga of humanity. The plains stretch on, endless and eternal, and in their whispers one can hear the song of the conqueror who became timeless.